let's get started. I'll call the meeting to order, 5:37. Thanks for getting this set up on Zoom, and for whoever manages it. Chris, I assume it's you that manages and lets people in, or is it Catherine or Anthony?
Chris is doing it.
Chris, okay, so, all right, good. One or two quick housekeeping things. So on this front, yeah, obviously just if anyone is, if I'm lagging or delayed, I'm back behind the firewall again this week through work. So if I start lagging like I did a couple weeks back, just wave your hands, whatever, and I'll bail and go to the iPad. Also, if I'm looking like this off to the side, I'm not watching TV that you know of. No, I'm not watching TV. I have two good-sized monitors, and oftentimes, as with now, I have attachments up like, you know, meeting minutes, agendas, and stuff like that. So I'm not ignoring you guys. And so the agenda was sent along, and we've got, of course, now I've hidden it for myself, got a budget update, budget discussion up first. Oh, and it's a virtual meeting, so as it's recorded, to indicate it is being recorded, which I see on the screen there, and then to identify all attendees, Carrie Gelsma, Mike Therian, David Molitano, Jim Purdy, myself, Alex Began, and then, of course, Chris Holak, Anthony Ansaldi, and Catherine as well, Catherine Tinsley. So, so I guess just to kind of kick things off, one thing I want to mention is that thanks to Chris and Jackie, we've got these now on the calendar, I believe, through May on Wednesday. So this will be our scheduled time. Does the Zoom meeting remain the same? It does, right? The ID?
No, the ID
no.
changes each
okay.
one.
Okay, I know that's a setting. You can keep it the same or change it for sake of a different number, and so it's different every time. No problem. Okay, so we've got these going through May, and what we'll do is we'll keep on the order of frequent weekly. Sorry, I get a call from Hamilton. We'll keep these for frequent meetings, and then hopefully we won't need to drag them on too long either. But it's good to have an open dialogue and discussion. Why don't we start in on the budget update? We've got a few kind of artifacts that we can talk about. Chris had sent over some documents and email to the FinCom with regard to budget to actuals. There was a Board of Selectmen meeting yesterday evening, which I was able to attend. And perhaps Anthony, in a quick recap, you could bring us up to speed on some of the important discussion there, along with Chris as to where we are with FY20 potential budget. Expenditure adjustments, modifications there. And additionally, between last week and today, as we've been thinking about some of the potential changes from a budgeting standpoint to either FY20, FY21, or potentially both, Jim Purdy has sent over some good comments via email, so I think those will help to spur discussion and get talking. So maybe in that order, if I can ask Chris and Anthony to give an update on the documentation that was sent, the budget to actuals, maybe walk us through that, / the BOS meeting recap, in either order, whoever wants to go to kick it off.
I'll do a recap of last night's BOS meeting. It's a start. So at the April 7th meeting, the BOS charged me with looking at some non-essential functions in town to see if there was areas for potential cuts. So did that, and there's a 5-page report that was included in the packet. And things that were on there included Pleasant Pond. So to basically not hire back lifeguards and gatekeepers for the month of May and June, and this is just for FY20, so the remainder of this fiscal year. If we did that, that's $6,900 and change in savings there. Public Works, there's some part-time and summer help that they use. That came to just shy of $6,000. Then there's also street capital, $85,000. That's normally used after a winter to do repairs. and supplement some paving projects. There's also tree maintenance that is usually necessary after a harsh winter. That's $10,000. Fortunately, we had a pretty good winter. And then tree plantings for another $2,000. So in total, the public works potential cuts was $102,813. Facilities normally would hire summer help about now. So if we eliminated that for May and June, that would be $3,750. Town clerk has an administrative position that normally works about 8 hours or so a week. She's not working right now. I don't anticipate town hall to open back up. My guess is through May anyways. And by not filling that position and leaving it vacant for the end of the fiscal year, that's $1,376. And then we talked about some other functions that were included in my memo. We talked about the assessor's office, reducing those part-time hours from 20 and 18 respectively down to 10 and 9. There's also pros and cons to doing any of this stuff, especially once you get the staff that's present in these positions, like the assessors. But I won't get into details with those right now. Land use, there are 2 part-time positions for our planning and conservation. That would be, we talked about reducing that from 19 to 12. Council on Aging, part-time positions there, more reductions. Assessor's office would have saved $3571. Land use would have saved about $3,700. Council on Aging would have saved about $3,300, reducing some hours there. And then we talked about the library, which is always on people's minds. And it's not just in this community. A lot of communities are talking about libraries because they are strictly closed and they're not supporting a function, an essential function like, say, finances with payroll and et cetera. So if we eliminated the part-time staff altogether, brought them down to 0, and then reduced full-time staff from 35 to 20, that would have recognized a total savings of $46,000, but the savings to Wenham only would have been $15,000. And last thing that we talked about is administration and whether or not we could reduce hours of positions like the town administrator, the interim finance director, police chief, fire chief, DPW director, COA director, water superintendent, library director. With that, there are some questions as to what we can and cannot do as far as, because they're FLSA exempt employees. So to make a long story short, the selectmen decided to make all the cuts to those where people currently sitting in positions wouldn't be affected. So that was Pleasant Pond, Public Works, Facilities, and Town Clerk. And those reductions came to $114,877. All the remaining stuff is not that it's off the table, but it's tabled right now, depending on collections in the fourth quarter. Really, the big thing is the fourth quarter real estate tax bills.
Anthony,
That
this
was
is Mike. So I
Hi, Mike.
how are you? So I listened to the selectmen's meeting. So those other items that you have, if you implemented them, what would the total then be?
Great point. Great question. So the total would have been 152,000 in total. So we held back on $38,000 of cuts right now.
So the selectmen keep talking about a number that's 300 to 350. So you're only a third of the way there.
the concern is what's going to be the loss on the real estate taxes. Some articles that you'll find out there say it could be upwards of 10%. Maybe that's true in some communities, and maybe it's not in other communities. And there's just no way to gauge. You know, it depends on what, you know, thing that we don't know is how many residents in Wenham have been laid off and don't have an income source right now. So, you know, 10% of what we bill out, which is $4.6 million, is $460,000. So that's if we did not collect 10%. And if you go back to the last recession, I think that you'll see that we didn't have that much of a falling off. From what I understand, it could be anywhere from a 2 to a 5%. So 10% is, I think, a little steep.
I still don't, see, I'm trying to be nice. I still don't
That's
think we're
okay.
I don't think you're answering the question.
Mike, were you referring to like in that number 300 to 350 or whatever? Are you getting at the override amount in reductions there for FY21?
I keep hearing Jack keep saying this quarter before this fiscal year, what if we're short 350,000? What are we going to do? We're only a third of the way there. So where are the other cuts coming from? We're not given any options to them to say, well, if you want to get over the next 2/3, you're going to have to make some drastic cuts. But all they're hearing is, all right, I gave you a scenario and some numbers that gave us a third of the way there, 150, give or take. So where's the rest of the stuff coming from if it happens? It's more of a what if drill in terms of where do we find those other dollars? Actually, I think I know where you find those other dollars, and it's not a good answer. I did my own calculations. You're going to have to furlough people. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it to do that. You can't touch the school budget, unfortunately. So you're now left with the rest. And you're already in what, April? So this quarter is almost done. You've already accrued expenses. I think correct me if I'm wrong, ladies and gentlemen, I think the selectmen keep poking that says, what is that bad news? What is if it happens? Let's not wait, but tell me what that bad news is.
Well,
that's all I'm trying to articulate.
You're right, Mike. And I joined last night's select board meeting. I didn't. I obviously didn't hear the executive session part. I was aware of the 115 or so thousand. I think that's the starting point, and I agree with you that it might have to be the reductions for FY20, given that we're only a month in. Pardon me. Might need to be more extreme if the revenue shortfalls play out as possibly they could, in terms of what don't we get in the form of real estate taxes paid, not just on time, but what's our shortfall there, given that, you know, if it's 4.6 million, it does, you know, it doesn't take a large percentage decline in those payments to make a material impact. But
I'm just concerned there's a miscommunication going on. So correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony. I see an assumption on your part that we may be okay if we take the 100 and some odd K worth of cuts, and you still expect the revenues to come, we'll be okay. Selectmen are thinking differently, and here's where I think people are talking past each other. Please correct me if I'm wrong, people.
You know, it's just the unknown, Mike. I wish I had a crystal ball and say what we're going to lose in real estate, but I don't know. I just don't know.
No, not the other way. You're talking income. How about expenses?
Well,
So if you didn't get it,
so if we didn't get it, there's a big problem because, our payroll is only 164,000 townwide per every 2 weeks. So basically,
Yeah.
that would be shut down June and everybody go home and somebody turn the lights out. There's 320,000.
that's
Also,
what I
where's that
came up
number
with.
coming from? It seems almost arbitrary.
Well, that's what it is. That's
Right.
the number of if we didn't collect,
10%.
some percentage.
Right.
10% of 4.6 million is 460,000. So, is it 10? Is it 9? Is it 8? Is it 7? Is it 6? Can only be, we normally collect 99. We don't collect 100%. So, what's the percentage? I don't know. We're monitoring the revenues all the time now, and May 1st is obviously a big day for us to see what we do bring in.
Yeah, I think in another 2 weeks, we'll have a better understanding of the initial impact of any, COVID-related real estate tax, right? Most of our revenue is real estate taxes, and we expect it to take a hit. We don't know how big. I'd be venturing guess. I personally think it's reasonable to try to assume some reasonable decline, but I don't know what that number is unless they can base it on evidence of what's happened in previous recession. I mean, this is completely unprecedented. Nothing like this has ever
totally
happened.
Is. It's even tough to compare back to 2008 because it's a whole different circumstance. This was basically, shut the faucet off on the economy. It's
It'll play out. It'll play out in terms of real estate taxes. We've got to watch that very closely. It's going to play out in terms of other sources of revenue too. And however small, we have a really tight budget to begin with, a fiscal deficit, and the town's basically broken. We had our 360 and 720 override anyway, right? So we're talking $1 million override to begin with. So every $10,000 really counts. And I think that those first measures were appropriate. Mike, to your point, I think what you're saying is we might need to go further if we have a drastic shortfall. I don't disagree with that.
Yep.
And I think we need to challenge each other to just say, like, where should we be looking not only to cut expenses, but what other sources of revenue might be on the decline that we don't see yet or feel yet that could hurt us. I'll throw one or two out there. Permitting. I've got construction going on still. I'm hearing with a very limited base of all my subs are out, all my GC subs are out because thank goodness we're at the end of this project. That said, I hear a lot directly from contractors, as do those in the permitting office there, of course, that this stuff's done, right? We all know with a lot of the construction deemed, quote, essential, it ain't happening anyway. Commercial shut down, no one's going into people's houses. Residents don't want them in, and they don't want to go in anyway. So we've got any construction in Wenham is inherently residential, right?
If
We've
you
had
look at the revenue sheet, though, it looks like permitting is up, which surprised me.
But on a lag. I agree with you, but nobody's funding any projects right now. Nobody's taking on any projects.
You're talking about the last quarter, that you think there might be a drop off entirely.
Construction has all but ceased, exactly.
Have to be, yeah.
Its construction has ground to a complete halt. If you were contemplating,
We're already 163% compared to last year in electrical and 109% in building compared.
Absolutely, year over year, it absolutely, Carrie. But relative to this at this point in time, it may decrease entirely. So yes, versus budget, but we may have an amount that we can't even budget for next year at all. Permitting might be a fraction of what it was in FY20. Period. And agreed. Yeah, it's on the up because we've got a bull market.
I thought you were talking about in the fourth quarter.
No,
FY21 too.
These carry into FY20. Oh yeah,
I thought you were talking about specifically the fourth quarter.
Sorry, I think we'll start to see the impact. It's not going to bring us negative versus budget, right? It's not going to put us in the red relative to where we budgeted. To your point, where we far exceeded it because of a 10-year bull market and the fact that jobs were lined up nonstop, but those construction jobs have absolutely ground to a halt.
In terms, a quick question, in
Yeah.
terms of real estate revenue, is anyone hearing from people just even anecdotally that they can't come up with their taxes, that there's going to be difficulties? Is that any discussions that anyone's heard or gotten
No, I
called?
haven't heard anything like that.
That's a good question, Jim. Chris, has the finance department received any calls with questions from residents perhaps about, hey, what's happening at the state level? Obviously, we know that the select board voted to reduce for the month of May, the interest and penalties, stuff like that. But like, are you getting any calls from residents just with questions?
Oh, I know mostly I was talking with Sherry and Janet, the two other people in the office, and they said the majority of the calls they were getting have been asking just about if we were waiving the penalty, the interest and demand fees if they were late. I haven't heard of any concerns about not being paid, but a lot of the questions were just asking if Wenham was going to adopt the waiving the late fees if they didn't pay by May 1st. I'll follow up with them tomorrow. I'm touching base with them tomorrow to see if there's been any new ones this week. But I know as of last week, that was the main, a lot of the calls we were getting was just asking if there was going to be waived fees and stuff.
The good thing, if there is a good thing in this whole thing, is that, a large, and I don't know, maybe Chris can tell us the percentage of that we receive property tax from mortgage companies. But the fourth quarter, so the real estate taxes have been pretty much accrued because the payments were due on May 1st. So if there's any silver lining in it, I'm hoping that most of the real estate was accrued, and therefore we'll see most of it coming from the mortgage companies that we normally do.
Yes, that is a meeting up with Sherry tomorrow at the office to try to get a list of all the mortgage companies to see how much we received for them in third quarter, because then technically it should be that same amount in the fourth quarter. My early estimate is going to be around like $2 million probably from those mortgage companies out of our fourth quarter commitment.
Do we have a sense of the percentage that come through through the banks and the mortgage companies?
That is what I'm going in. I'm going to be
That's what you're going to
starting
find
to work
out
on
tomorrow?
that. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm Sherry touching base
big-
with our treasurer collected tomorrow to get a list of all the mortgage companies. I know of two off the top of my head. We have CoreLogic and Wells Fargo, but I believe there's a couple smaller ones. And usually our Wells, the CoreLogic's usually around like 1.5 million or so, and I think the Wells Fargo's are in the 500 range. So,
Yep.
And then all the percentages. Once I get the actual numbers and find out all those, then I'll be able to put together a percentage of the fourth quarter and stuff like that once I
Sounds
get
like
those numbers.
50%, Jim.
Excuse me?
Sounds like what he just said was about 50%.
Come through mortgage and banks?
Yeah. That's a guess based on what he just said.
All right.
I would say, yeah, that's probably a quick off the top of my head. I would say that's probably about right. That's what I was thinking.
That's interesting. I would have guessed a much higher number. I would think that number would be lower in more affluent communities. Is that correct? Would you all agree?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the ability to not escrow and therefore, yeah. So I would expect that number to be lower than average, but I would have guessed higher.
It could be, like I said, that this is I haven't I started working in some expenses, so the revenue is going to start tomorrow, so it could be higher. That was just an estimate off the top of my head, without looking into anything yet. That was on my list for tomorrow.
Okay.
I need to go in the office to get that stuff, and I'm heading in there tomorrow.
And,
I'm sorry,
go ahead, Mike. No, that's all right, Mike. Go ahead.
So Chris, are you caught up on all the expenses?
Yes, I posted we're doing warrants every other week, so I will be doing a warrant next Tuesday So there's been no expenses posted at all this week. So all the expenses in that expense budget that you got are all up to date. And there'll be a new one. I'll send out a new one on for the agenda for our meeting next Wednesday after I do the warrant on Tuesday. I'll have updated numbers on those expenses.
Then you should get a good idea if there are any shortfalls.
I think we need to track the revenue independently also, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yes.
one thing I was thinking about is on the excise tax piece as a big part of local receipts. I recall writing a check for excise taxes combined. I write one check, right? Stuff them all into one envelope. That feels like it was maybe 2 months ago. Does that feel about right? Does that sound right to you all?
Yeah. Yes, I believe because they run, I believe, on the calendar year. So I think you would have got the new 21 around January or so, probably January, February, somewhere in
Late
that
January,
range.
early February.
Yeah.
Are we, so, and that's on an annual basis, right? So it's not semi-annual, quarterly. So have
We send out multiple commitments and bills based on when people, if they buy cars and throughout the year.
depending
we'll
upon
do-
when you buy it, right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because you
Yes.
want to buy it at a certain time to avoid that hit if possible. The second tax. But so if you could let us know, Chris, if not now, how we're tracking relative to this point in time last year. And I think actually over the next month, it'll be rather interesting to see on a trend, how we're trending this year in a relatively short time period, relative to last year and maybe the last couple of years. I mean, I don't know when the car buying season is per se, but you can sure as heck bet that no one's really buying cars the last 7 weeks, 8 weeks. So it might take another month to play out, but I would expect, and local receipts are big for us, right? So I'd expect those to take a hit.
I'll look into. I've been working on stuff like that, so I'll do one specifically for the motor vehicle, and I can send that off to you.
Okay, thanks. And excise taxes are a little over 600, is that right? Typically 650, or am I calling all of local receipts that amount?
No, I believe usually in excise, I believe you usually get around like 650 to
675,
700,000
700
around that
somewhere.
range.
Okay, all right. All right. I mentioned permitting, local receipts, excise. Chatting with David earlier, brought up like kind of building and grounds, kind of field maintenance, lack of, trash to empty that. I think that gets into kind of like the DPW related work, right? One I'd like to throw out there, we don't have much to do with parking tickets, speeding tickets, right? So nobody's driving, which in a way, I suppose for those who like to drive real fast, it's an opportune time. I'm not one of those people, but you wonder, I think speeding tickets, I know our police department is very reasonable and isn't, probably doesn't live up to the reputation of Wenham being overly harsh for speeding tickets. I recall in their update that, it's some high percentage warning, 80% warning, whatever it is. But I would think with less traffic, there's fewer accidents. Maybe there's less ambulance revenue as well. I never really thought about that. There should be fewer, setting aside COVID, which on its own could, of course, has the potential to result in, health related issues, ambulance calls, public safety, police, fire included. But I'd be curious about that. I think over the next couple of months, how that plays out. Nobody's on the road, right? It's empty. You go for a walk, you go for a run, you see 2 cars when you would have seen 200. So I would think hope that accidents are down. And I wonder if speeding tickets are down too. So that might be something that we could find out about. Revenue. That revenue goes right back to where does that revenue go?
No, the revenue,
police?
the speeding tickets get paid to the state, and then we get a portion of them back.
We get a cut. So it plays out
Yeah.
over time, probably. It's probably like they're accrued, and it's like a monthly, here's your check for your speeding tickets. It's obviously not hit all on a one-by-one basis.
Yeah, and then,
All right.
the only one that get paid right to us would be like parking tickets, and we have very few of those.
Yeah. Of course,
Oh,
yeah.
And going back to the motor vehicle, last year we got just shy of 787,000 in motor vehicle excise last year, in fiscal 19.
How much? I'm sorry, could you repeat
Um,
that, Chris?
786,000 and change.
Okay, thank you.
This year, just, I'm just looking at it, we're, if I'm reading this correctly, we're 353,000 to the good for this year to date.
We've got about, we're probably around like 600,000 to date right now, yes.
I'm saying 488, 374
Mhm.
on what you sent, unless I'm reading the wrong document.
Nope. Nope. Yeah, we got for so far in 20 excise, we've got 488,000, and then in 19 people paying the old year, we got 108,000.
Right. And we estimated this year 135. So, Alex, were you worried about the coming fiscal year, obviously, right?
Jim, we didn't estimate, when you say, no, I'm talking this fiscal year, I'm talking this playing into FY20. Excuse me one second.
So FY20, we're pretty healthy here.
No,
Well, no,
no, we
Jim,
don't.
I did the same thing. So that's, and I questioned Chris on this. I would say that number in his report is not correct, and it should be the number that's budgeted, which is the 660 something thousand.
Yeah.
Because I
so-
said the same thing as you, Jim. I was like,
okay.
oh,
So
that's
the
good.
The estimate number is not the right number.
Well, so what happened is to get to a maximum levy limit, you adjust your estimated motor vehicle revenue
Oh,
to go to get to the levy, to do the levy limit. So
okay.
so that's why that was decreased a little bit. So like Anthony was saying, we budgeted.
So estimated is not necessarily budgeted then. Is that what you're telling all of us?
Yeah, just for the motor vehicle. Everything else is budgeted from what we did the budget. But to get to the maximum levy limit, you can either decrease your abatements on the recap or decrease your motor vehicle estimated revenue.
Yeah,
Go the estimated revenue way.
The problem with this is when you look at it like I did and like Jim did, is that it looks like we're to the good 361, almost 362%, when in fact we're not. So this report caused me problems in responding to a newspaper journalist today, because I thought the same thing, Jim, without actually verifying that number. So
Yeah, is there a difference between estimated and budgeted?
yeah.
It's the same. So all those other numbers. So like we budget like charges for services. Just say I'm just throwing a number like we're gonna get 40,000 in revenue for charge for service, but then those charges for services are broken up into like 10 different accounts. So then I'll allocate that 40,000 on a percentage from prior years to give those 10 accounts an estimated revenue budget. So it's just the budgeted and the estimated will be the same for everything except the motor vehicle, except for the motor vehicle excise, which was what I was explaining before.
So why can't that be the budgeted number? Does that affect some other report that you do to do the recap?
Well, when I do the budget entries, I base it off the tax recap, and the tax recap shows that as 150. If we want to just go by the budget amount, I can switch it. It just wouldn't tie into the recap, our tax recap.
Well, it's important to get a budget report that's going to be accurate.
So this was I've just followed suit how it's always been in the past. If we want to make that change in 21, that's something that can be done. Very easy, Anthony. I can just change that to our budget amount and not the tax recap estimated amount. So if we want to make that change, we can do that.
But Alex, getting back to your point for 21, if you see that, we did 488,000 so far this year, and that's a big number compared to prior years. The drop off, given the economy, might be significant in 21, regardless.
You got to
Okay.
add everything above that too, Jim, for the
So
prior
there's-
year
so
collections.
here I'm looking at a roll up from, back when we were doing the budget back in, February, but this line hasn't changed. Actuals motor vehicles in 18, 731,000. Actuals in 19, 787,000. Voted, it budgeted for FY20, which we're in, of course, 663,000. That's where I was getting this, 650-ish.
So I have a different numbers in front of me, so maybe I'm screwing it up.
Well, this is on a roll up. I wouldn't have expected those to have changed, 18 and 19. I'll admit, Jim, I'm not as familiar with the PDF version with the account line items and the BVAs that Chris sent. So I think this is just a good thing to follow up on and figure out why, so to your point, they're broken down. I mean, this is for the current fiscal year, but their annual amounts, like for 19, are still 108 grand, right?
Yes.
In actual,
So like we've collected in $130 of 2014 excise tax in fiscal year 20. So that all rolls up into, so if that was 19, that 130 would have rolled up into the total 19.
And is that just like past due? What does that mean?
Yeah, so all excise tax, if they get flagged at the registry, and you can't renew your license if you don't pay. So someone that hasn't paid in their excise in 5 years and then goes to renew their license.
But that's $1,000 for the out of date stuff, right? They finally get whacked at the registry window. No, you're not getting anything. You deadbeat, and then they got to pay their bills. But that's $1,000 to the town. I guess I'm looking at the 108,000 on the actual and the 488,000. So it makes sense, right? Because the taxes I just paid are for 19, right? That we all just paid.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's and then.
So you add up all those together, and so the 488 plus the 108, so that's 596 plus the 2,000. So you're almost at $600,000.
I got it.
And suffice it to say, nobody's buying cars. Well, few people are buying cars relative to whoever normally would at this time of year. I don't even know, right? And then that's going to play out, I think, probably more. I think I was wrong in assuming it's going to play out kind of soon. Although receipts, and that's where I was going initially, like when were they due? When are we getting them? If they were due a couple of months ago, and I've forgotten before because you put them in the junk mail pile or the mail pile, and then you forget, and then you get the, oh no, I'm a deadbeat, I owe an extra $5 command or whatever, and then you say, all right, well, the town gets an extra few bucks. I wasn't late this year. I was early to avoid forgetting, and what I was going to say.
Tell anyone that you're head of FinCom.
I mail them in. I'm not going to, So, but I guess my point is that's like going to be deemed discretionary. If someone's not able to pay their mortgage, they're going to not pay their excise first, right? Because it takes years to catch up with you. Theoretically, in the grand scheme of things, I think that might almost go first, right? $400, $500 is a lot of money for excise. The state still hits you with any newer car. It's according to the formula, right? The depreciation schedule is kind of wonky, but that might actually, you don't, because what's the recourse? It's not going to destroy your credit. To your point, eventually, Chris, you'll have to, pay up to get your license renewed, but otherwise the bank's just going to trash your credit if you don't pay your mortgage. / penalty and fees would be bigger despite the waiving of them for May. So that's something to watch. And then I think that's all I had for just kind of potential sneaky revenue things.
I think also for excise, I think it's a little bit more. I think it will be a little bit more consistent than people are thinking, because there are a lot of people with lease vehicles. So when those leases come up, they still probably going to trade them in and get that newer version. So, or at least buy. So there are a lot of leases in town as well. So there is still the possibility that there could be new cars and extra revenue coming in when their leases come up and they need to trade them in.
Yep, good point. Yeah, no, the leases are, the excise is part of the lease payment for sure. Okay. Anthony, thanks for the recap on that. I actually, I don't know if I froze up. I actually, when you were talking, you all froze for like 30 seconds that I was getting ready to dial in the iPad, but this seems to be okay. So, are there any next steps planned with BOS, and are there any, like, is there anything that's needed on our part from your view, Anthony, in terms of recommendations?
You know, I think at some point the FY21 discussions need to happen. You know, we are working on the list, and we do have it done of what would be cut in the event that the override doesn't happen. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Okay.
Can we see that list at some point?
Yeah, as soon as the Board of Selectmen gets to see it first.
Okay.
So I'm hoping within the next week to two that they'll have an opportunity to look at it.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I encourage people, if they get a chance to check out the select board meeting from the other night, just to hear the kind of the views expressed and questions as well. Obviously, we just have to keep seeing where this plays out. I am going to chat with David Wenger, the Hamilton FinCom chair, later this week. I believe tomorrow evening. And, you know, as was mentioned by Anthony earlier, you know, the library with which we share the benefits and costs associated with Hamilton, you know, is something that is a service that I think should be just looked at to see if a change in the operating model temporarily should be taken for purposes of, you know, expense reduction where I think that, you know, COVID is, you know, proven particularly hard for any of these public services. One other note is that the school committee, Michelle Bailey reached out with a message with some key dates of information being shared from the state, and I'll give that I'll forward that email, but I'll give that information towards the end of our discussion tonight. And she had followed up in response to our discussion last week, saying seeking to help out where we're looking for some information related to school-related expenditure decreases. And she didn't have that information, but I kind of shared a bit of what I was kind of mentioning earlier with places where kind of revenue might decrease. I was also thinking that school expenses might decrease, energy, utilities, paper, toner, and miscellaneous supplies, cafeterias and the like. So hopefully they get some kind of details on that. I think the school committee and the administration obviously has a lot of
Just to add to that,
work there.
Alex,
Yes, Jim.
just, you know, given the announcement the other day,
Yeah.
I truly hope they're going to be looking at the transportation contract. Is that happening, Anthony, you think?
I reached out to both Joe and Julie this morning to try to get them to meet, and I'm hoping that's going to happen either tomorrow or Friday, because, yeah, certainly that's on my list, as well as seeing what else could be a savings on the town side, on the school side, considering, again, that's 54%,
Mm-hmm.
you know, of our budget. And like I said, with our bi-weekly payroll at 160,000, it's, you know, you just can't make this all up on the town side. It's just, it's just not that much. There's no fat. So,
My other thought, Anthony, was looking at, quite frankly, they have 8 custodians, 10 custodians between all the schools.
You might know better. I don't know the number, but
Yeah.
that sounds reasonable.
It's
Yeah.
something like that. It would seem to me, now, unless there's major projects, that there could be some reductions there you might put on the table with the school committee. I mean, the kids aren't in the classrooms, they have to clean up every day. And not to say that you'd cut them entirely, but, you know,
There's some kind of saying, yeah, you know, as far as something to keep in mind with most of the full-time staff, if not all of the full-time staff in the school department, is unionized. So when you talk about a reduction of the workforce or furloughs or anything like that, the unions are going to be turning around asking us, the town, to say, show me where you're not going to make this. So unfortunately, it's not sometimes that easy to just say, you know, let's reduce union workers right now without having some kind of
I get that. I also got, what my thinking is, should we be talking with the unions? I mean, if this thing unfolds into 21 in a dire kind of way, should we be talking about the unions in some form or fashion about some savings?
Yeah, there's a process to do, and I actually started that about 3 weeks ago, if not a month ago. And I had that informal discussions with our unions to let them know this isn't good. You know, we already had a problem in FY21 and that we had overrides, and certainly this certainly jeopardizes those from passing. If I was a betting man, I might bet that they won't pass. So with that, you know, I asked them and said, you know, one of the things that I'd be looking at is want to impact bargain and have forego the COLAs. So, you know, that's the first step, is you kind of have the informal discussion. Then you just kind of hit them with the formal letters saying, you know, it's time to impact bargain.
But Anthony, those are the town unions you're referring to, right? Those discussions that you.
Yeah, and it's the
started.
same process for on the school side too. So that's what I want to have them to see what they're having for discussions.
Right. I would expect the same, to find out where is the school committee and administration jointly at with any discussions. I mean, it's one thing to say there'd be early discussions, but things have happened so fast. We're 7 weeks into this now, and there's not a word that I'm aware of yet in terms of expense changes from the schools.
Along those lines, Alex or Anthony, when in your discussions with Kuchenberger or Michelle, is there a willingness to share actuals versus estimates, similar to what we just are doing with the town expenses and revenues? So I think that would be worth doing at this point. I would like to have a better handle on how dollars are changing in reality versus estimates for both FY20 and FY21. One, because it's such a different circumstance than expected. And two, with just the changeover of the administration, I would like to have a better handle on what's going on. And also, you know, I haven't attended or listened to other school committee meetings, but I'm not sure to the extent these issues are being reviewed. So I know, Alex, you said you talked to Michelle. Did it seem like they'd be willing to produce actuals?
Carrie, we should put together that request. I totally agree with you.
Okay.
And I think we should have them monthly. Feel free to reach out to Vinny and Dr. Kuchenberger, or I can as well, but I think we should be asking for that.
Well, that's my question. I didn't know if a request like that had already gone through with Anthony's meetings or if your meetings, but I'm also happy to do it separately, whatever works.
I think, well, so the town, go ahead, Anthony.
Joe and I are certainly going to ask for that. Matter of fact, I brought this up to her about 3 weeks ago in our last conversation. I said, you know, there should be some kind of savings. And then remember, we also had a deficit a $300,000 structural deficit or deficit within our budget. And I said, oh yeah, but wait a minute. I said, don't use this to fill that gap, because you had already made the commitment that was going to come from the circuit breaker or something. So I'm not looking to COVID-19 issues to solve the school's budget problems. In my opinion, I think that that's something that they committed to using their circuit breaker, and they should continue to use their circuit breaker. And hopefully that the savings that are on the expense side, that is passed back to the towns.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's exactly how it should play out. Whether or not it will, I haven't heard any, Carrie, to your point, I haven't heard any details. Anthony, please do frame that ask as well in your discussions with them, and we can follow on and do the same.
Okay,
Oh,
so
yeah, absolutely.
should I
Yeah.
let Anthony follow up with that, or should I initiate an email or see how it plays out with you first?
Frankly, I think it's fine I mean, these are, respectful requests for information that is completely appropriate for us to have. So I think it's fine if we
Yeah,
ask what they have available as well.
And Carrie, if you want to send it through me, and then I can forward that off and say our FinCom's asking, however way you want to do it, that's fine. Happy to have some
Yeah.
reinforcements behind me.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay, I'll
thanks,
draft an
Carrie.
email.
Thank you very much, Carrie. The IMA with the school district and member communities states that in the budget section 10 that both towns, town officials and select board and FinCom would be provided regular statements as to the financials, and so that's completely to be expected anyway. I know that we're unfortunately not in a good process and rhythm of receiving those things. And hopefully, again, with the new administration, or a change, I should say, in the administration, not entirely new, but with the new superintendent coming in, it will be able to, basically follow what the IMA states is required and get those information.
I think we did get
Regularly.
some after we requested.
We did.
Because in
Yeah.
prior years, we got 0 when we were
Yeah.
requested.
No,
And I think
Vinny's
that
totally open to sharing info, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that IMA is due to be reworked on too, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So, and just along the lines of all that, so I want to, if I may, kind of mention a few of the items, and you've probably read Jim's emails, and some of them we've talked about here, but I think that to kind of jump back to the first one, Jim, I appreciate you putting this together, contemplating, potential changes to the following. Pleasant Pond, I think, is spot on, and that's been addressed by the town already. I think that, as I stated before, that's a public gathering site. No one would buy a pass, and likely would be closed anyway. We simply can't fund it.
Yeah.
Part-time library hours, reducing them potentially, and possibly some programs. I don't even know what programs can be provided, quite frankly, at this stage. I mean, I'm sure there are some virtual programming elements, and I'm sure they're doing the best they can.
Alex, it was pointed out to me that a lot of their programs are funded through the Friends of the Library.
This is absolutely the case, Jim. That said, the Friends of the Library can decide whether or not to fund their programmatic expenditures, right? And from the town side, we still fund to about $1 million jointly with Hamilton, split, 1/3, 2/3. So it's still a meaningful town expense. Legal expenses, you point out, Jim, I think astutely that those can have the tendency to increase. I think they tend to be episodic and, specific to the nature of litigation that doesn't necessarily tie into, economic trends or, municipal budgeting kind of trends that are playing out. That said, I think it's always good to be careful with it. Just to go quickly through your other items, the water department expense, the increased water department to review that. I assume are you referring to in that, Jim Bullitt, either the hiring of a additional member or the hardware?
I was referencing that, but not specifically. I
Yeah.
was thinking, can we get through this next year, 21, without that additional position? And
Yeah,
that's
that's not happening.
Right.
Additional position. You can
And-
count
and-
on that.
so that's gone.
It's gone.
Okay.
We're going
Okay.
to work with, we're going to have one of our DPW workers work on getting the certification to provide it being a backup.
Okay.
And I spoke with Eric and Bill Tyak this morning about that. So Eric is not expecting the employee, and we will have a backup that they're required to have by getting one of our existing staff trained. Unfortunately, right now, there's just no way to train them because they're not running the trainings, but they will. Eventually, it'll open up and and we'll do that. So
So
That's-
the elimination of that position, Anthony, is factored into 21 already?
yeah, that shouldn't even be in the warrant book. I had told Jackie to
okay.
take that out.
I might have missed it.
Okay. Okay, and to go through the remaining items, IT expense increase, to review that, 50% increase in IT. Salary freeze for non-contractual staff. Consider that to existing levels. Interesting for selectmen to forego their stipend for FY21 is a statement to employees in the community. Them fighting words, Jim.
What's their
Yeah.
stipend?
Is
Well,
it 10
I
grand?
think really, it's
25,000 each.
No, it isn't.
right.
No, it's not.
It's
No.
like 3,500.
Gary's
It's like,
Gary's
5 grand.
smiling down there.
Yeah, I know. Gary's rolling it. Gary's all of a sudden going to have a change of heart.
I think it's like
Really,
33,
35.
Really
33,
a statement
35,
to the
yeah.
community.
It's
I think
it's 900 and change a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's
Okay.
it's a statement to the community
10-8.
and to employees. You know, how many companies are foregoing or are reducing senior executive salaries and so on? Or I just think strategically it may be something to consider.
I will say that Jack has voluntarily taken a 25% reduction in his line.
Thanks. That's good to know. And all kidding aside, Jim, I agree. As a statement, I don't want to call it a token because it's real money. It's small and it's real money at the same time. And I think to as kind of a measure of, you know, in good faith and in goodwill to consider that. I don't have a personal take on it. If someone feels strongly they should retain it, but I also think it's probably viewed positively to the extent that one can.
You know, the courtesy I should have given the selectmen the courtesy as well of maybe raising that with Jack as the chairman, and I haven't done that.
I don't think they would take offense to that. I think in the spirit of reducing expenses, it appears as though they beat you to it, Jim, on their own front, maybe, and I don't know across the board. So I wouldn't. I think frankly, it's really appropriate to, you know, bring up, and I would say the same about us, but we're on a volunteer basis, which is good because some people wouldn't be able to do it otherwise.
Right.
Yeah, I think that suggestion is just due diligence and leaving no stone unturned.
Right.
And reasonable.
Yep. Suggestion for, you know, consideration is appropriate by each member and can leave it at that. Yep. School committee, working with them to see what reductions can be made this year and it's FY21. I think that's going to play out.
Yeah.
Start to play out soon. And then capital expenses in general. And then your follow-on was, I think some of that we talked about
Yes.
already, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for that. I just think it's all good items, and to Carrie's point, it's being, it's exercising due diligence in revisiting these items. And it's good to know that the water department, we won't have to raise expenses as much, incorporating an additional hire as we would otherwise, since residents are going to be feeling it. David had to drop off, which I knew of. I actually reminded him on the side. I said, "You told me you had a hard stop at 6:30." So it's not a technology issue on his front. It's his schedule. That's the bulk of what I had. I know we have minutes to approve, but are there any other topics for discussion on the budget front?
Yeah, I have a couple things. One, I left the meeting for a few minutes, but I just want to back up to this revenue sheet that we got. Where there are holes, like with the the Gordon call reimbursement for fire calls, is that just because, you know, it's estimated at 49,284?
Which page is that? Second page?
It's on just the 2-page revenue. It's on the second page, and it's the third line down.
Thank you, Carrie.
Sure. And is that just because of the timing of the year? Like, is that something that comes in the fourth quarter?
That is something for when we respond to calls at Gordon College with our fire department. And that, from my understanding, is they don't need to pay us that. They have been, and we budget it, and it comes in sporadically. They'll send us checks here and there.
I
From my
think we talked
understanding.
about this in a meeting. But you know, the estimate was 49,000 and the actual so far is zero. And I think it's reasonable to request if there's an understanding that.
Yep. I'll
Chris, will
follow
you
up.
follow up with the fire department,
Yep.
please?
I was just making a note right now. I was going to say that I'll follow up with them.
I'm sorry.
That's a good point,
There's a
Karen.
delay and I'm talking over people.
I mean, clearly we track all the calls there, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We did talk about this at a meeting when the fire department was there about reimbursements. And I did think there were, you know, in a somewhat informal discussion, they were going to do that this year.
I think they are still. We've got a good arrangement historically with them. My guess is that the actual column is the expense incurred, and do we not? Perhaps we don't list the expense here. Is that the case? Because the line item is reimbursement, right?
Yeah, revenue. Yep, reimbursement.
So we wouldn't see an expense. The expense would be the salaries of the firefighters going over there.
That's right. Thank you. As you started to explain that, I realized I was off, and that's exactly the case. My bad. Yep.
So is it somewhere else then? Did you just say?
No, the expense gets hit just in their salaries. That's part of the fire salaries.
Right,
and
right.
then, so what it is they'll keep track of how many calls Wenham Fire responds to, and then pay us based on, then reimburse us based on that. But looking back, the couple of years, we've always got money, but it's been sporadic. It always comes in at different times from what I've seen. So I'll follow up with the fire and see if they've heard anything.
Okay, thank you. Also, a couple other things. I don't have the numbers handy, but in terms of, if we're looking for further reductions in FY20, someone else actually suggested this to me, but it's worth looking into. The Essex County Veterans Affairs Officer, is that something that we, I think we pay a percentage share based on who we share it with, but we don't have that many actual veterans that are serviced. It may only be a few $1,000s, but is that something worth looking at?
That is something, I'll let Anthony go on that.
Yeah, so Carrie, we have been working on that and it's been discussed. And in order to leave that service by law, we would have to notify them by May 1st. Prior to all this COVID stuff happening, it was discussed at the Veterans Committee because that certainly is an option. The Veterans Committee then took a vote to leave it or recommend, not that they have a vote in it, but just recommend to the selectmen. Their opinion was to just leave it. It's not broke, don't fix it.
Jack is also the one asking for cuts all over the place.
Yeah. Certainly, I can tell you on my cut list, it certainly is on my cut list.
Yeah.
I don't know if we'll have it in time to do it for FY21, but I certainly think that it's something that we need to look at because it's we could save a considerable amount of dollars there.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was actually a little disturbed at the fact that their last meeting to find out that they have free cash. So, which is telling me that she's actually billing or has billed more than she's needed to. And she had a nest egg. So with Hamilton leaving, they were able to dig into their little pool of funds to make it good this year. you know, you hear that the school has one, they have one, but the town of Wenham, you know, we don't have that. So I was a little disturbed with that, and I think that it's something that the town should seriously consider moving away from.
I'm not suggesting not supporting veterans, and maybe it's impossible to change the funding mechanism because maybe it's driven by state law more than I realize. But what I'm suggesting is paying it more in proportional share to how many veterans are serviced.
So it's broken down by population, Carrie.
Right. So we have a smaller percentage of veterans per population, or, you know, per 100 of population than I think some of the other regions in the agreement. So anyway, that's just a thought. I don't know.
No, great point.
Yeah, I think I'm glad you raised it, Carrie. I've had discussions about it as well. And I think it's important to get the range of opinions of those who are veterans and those who are familiar with the services rendered and the value and quality of those services in particular. I'm not calling them into question because I don't know enough about them, but I've heard some of the opinions that suggest that for the $25,000, we may not be getting a lot from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that isn't to say that the town isn't going to support its veteran community members, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully in the ways that this is designed to, and others. And I think it's a lack of familiarity, as I have historically with this particular program, that would lead me to not kind of question it. But if I'm hearing that we don't get a lot from it and that there are other options that we could get as much or more from the standpoint of the benefit back to veterans at a reduced cost, then we should do it, because then everybody benefits from it. But
yeah, I could make the case that I think that we could actually provide a better service to our veterans, not just those that are in need, but to all our veterans.
have you made that case to the committee, to the veterans?
I have, and there's, you know, I've worked with Bill Wilson on this as he was really digging deep into it, and I think Bill Wilson would echo those opinions. But he's just one person, you know, of many on that committee. But, you know, certainly it goes beyond. I think that it's something we should continuously look at and examine. Because one of the things that we're realizing during this is the structure that I had presented to them is we could have a veterans agent / emergency management coordinator.
Right.
And you know, we could pay somebody right now. She comes in 1 hour a month at the COA, and we could pay somebody 10 hours a week and still save about $16,000.
Mm-hmm.
And they could also help the police and fire write grants, just like Bob Breaker did. You know, in fact, that was one of the persons that I had in mind because Bob was a veteran.
Mm-hmm.
Well, was a veteran. Bob is a veteran, and also was doing the emergency management for the police, but that stipend didn't make it, so that's a void that we have.
Mm-hmm.
So, and now with the pandemic, that we, you know, it's something that would have helped.
Mm-hmm. I have other ideas that maybe I shouldn't introduce at this point because it's, you know, hatchet job, but you know, it depends. I think it's kind of wait and see depending on how extreme it gets with what, you know, we may end up needing to cut.
Okay. So it sounds like you want to share those or not yet?
Well, I mean, ideally we wouldn't make these cuts, but if we're looking for cuts because it's extreme, yeah, like one is, you know, I don't like thinking about this, but like the Community Conservation Act money, you know, that would provide some taxpayer relief. And again, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you know, that's something we've benefited from immensely. And it's been a fantastic program for Wenham. in many ways, including with the senior housing project that we just funded. But if we're looking to make cuts, that's something that's elective that the town elects to do.
That's
Terry,
used to pay down the town hall debt, though. Just keep that
I
in
was just
mind.
gonna say that.
So I think we have another
7 or 8 years, I
7 or 8
believe.
years to go.
And Carrie, no, there's been no community has ever, we'd be the first one to get out of CPA. There's no one's ever got out of the CPA tax once they've gone in it. So it would be a new process for everyone.
It's discretionary though, and it's a
Mhm.
first time for everything. And some would argue that you should. Some would argue that there should have been a town that did it long ago. I'm sure there are
Yep.
lots of people that would have argued that. So
I think that's definitely,
I'm not necessarily one of them saying that on behalf of Wenham. I'm just saying there's a case to be
Mhm.
made for it.
Mhm.
And also, I don't know what the process, if we could like hop out for a couple of years, because we have funded some excellent projects. I don't know what the debt levels are that you're referring to, like what the numbers are. But I don't know if the authorizing legislation or the regulations offer any kind of on-ramp back again if we step out for a couple of years while we're tightening our belt. So anyway, just throwing that out there. We don't need to deliberate it much more.
Shows you're thinking about it.
Oh, there's also I really like going for the environmental stuff. I used to work on environmental law. I like the environment, but anyway, the energy efficiency officer that we fund a certain amount every year. Is it like 5,000, 10,000?
5,000.
Yeah.
And I think that's come with substantial benefits, right?
It has.
Yeah, she writes a lot of our
Cost savings, grants.
She's got us a lot of green communities grants and has done a lot for us. And that's the maximum. If we wanted to reduce her, every year, Hamilton, that's a joint thing. She works with Hamilton and us. So she gets paid through Hamilton, and then Hamilton just bills us the hours that she works for Wenham. So they ask every year how much we want to put into that. So we could say, we want to drop this down to, $3,000 a year, or, $4,000, and then she would base her time on that. She may not be able to write as many grants or something though, if, depending on that. So that is something that can be, talked about, but
Just
she does too.
from my short time here, just in that last grant, the 127,000 that she got for us that we probably wouldn't have gotten, and then the savings that we're seeing as a result of the LED lights in this building, it really is 5,000 is money well spent in my opinion.
I would agree as well.
Were the LED lights paid for by a grant?
Yeah, it was paid by the Green Communities grant.
100%.
No,
Which we couldn't have had unless we had.
We did?
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
oh yeah,
Yeah,
sorry. Yes, we did.
So
we could have done that, Alex. We could write the grant. I can tell you that it's a tremendous amount of work, that Green Communities grant. So in knowing and overseeing that in Littleton, when I tell you money well spent, it's just money well spent. The time involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, we're not spending a lot on that service, which leads me to believe that it's highly specified. It's kind of a tailored understanding of the rules that pertain to the Green Communities Law Act, whatever, and then you can do a little cut and paste with each community, adjusting for the specifics required, right? And not to marginalize the work, because obviously all I hear is great things about her work, but I'm just saying that, it's not like we're spending $30,000 on this person along with Hamilton spending 50 or whatever. It's limited. It's a limited resource that's very valuable to town, it sounds like. But in the
It could
event
be
we had to cut
covered by the
dramatically.
Board of Select stipend.
Subsidization, exactly. Show how green they are. Show green they really are. All right. Carrie, I'm not going to let you go any further because you're going to, recommend that, Anthony sell his books behind him, and sell his computer. But I do think, to Jim's point, maybe if we can get to a couple of his email points also, just recap on the, let's revisit the increase in IT costs in our next discussion, maybe. And was there one other? Sorry, bear with me. I transitioned over to the minutes already on the monitor.
Alex, I
Yeah.
just think, not tonight.
Yep.
Reviewing capital, is there any value in taking a look at the capital that's been approved and maybe deferring some? I don't know.
That's what I was looking for, Jim. Thank you. And yeah, so let's, in IT is kind of, it's a service. It may not qualify as capital, but it's close enough. So maybe next week, if we could revisit the capital items and IT, please. Anything else to add to the budget discussion? Or questions for Chris and Anthony? Okay. Gary, anything you wanted to add in? Thanks for joining us.
No, just listening in, nothing here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining. Great. So with that, then we can transition over to the minutes on the agenda. I know, Chris, you had just sent some more recently, but if we could just jump back to the 4 that were provided a couple weeks ago when I was having Zoom issues, which I apologize for, and I ran off to sing happy birthday to my daughter before suggesting minutes. So I'll suggest in a kind of consent form that, or I'll move that FinCom approve the minutes for the 4 following meetings. January 29th, which is a joint meeting with the schools when we first heard from the administration on their budget, which of course we knew about for the most of January, as well as Town of Hamilton. February 13th, joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen. Also joint with BOS on February 18th, and lastly March 4th. I've gone through these. I don't have any substantive changes or edits to make. Oh, sorry. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Thank you, Carrie. It's interesting because it kind of takes us through the kind of a lot of the meat of the budget process. Some tough discussions and some kind of nearing the recap phase. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns on the minutes that's provided?
The meeting is of February 27th? No?
Jim, I don't think I had sent that one originally, but that might have been a follow-on one.
Okay.
I have it.
You have Feb 27? I didn't have it on my list that I reviewed today.
It's dated February 27 on the document, but in the attachment title, it's dated February 26. So you might want to look for it's FC 2.26.2020.
Thank you. Okay. I didn't review that today.
And it was sent on March 4th. Oh, by Alex.
Yeah, I didn't review it today, but I'm trying to bring it up really quickly to see if I reviewed it previously. Carrie, Jim, are you in a position to approve or?
On the February 27th meeting?
Yes.
On the, let's see. The last paragraph before review and potential vote, it starts, the committee acknowledged this was a difficult decision. That's the evening when we voted to support favorable actions.
Yes.
Right.
And I did I did have one word in there that it may be picky, but it says that we hastily agreed. And I just think that can denote that it was not a well thought out decision. But I think, Catherine, the way we were voting on it could appear that way. I've been thinking about those favorable or unfavorable for some time. So that's just my own small personal opinion about the use of that adjective.
I don't get the sense that our recommendation votes were made in haste. But it could have
Might
been,
getting late.
it might
Huh?
have, well, it was, so it might have been, it might have felt like it was done in an expedient manner relative to the past couple of years. And also we might have known, I think we had a lot of discussion
Yeah.
and I suppose deliberation, but open discussion as to where everyone was at for quite some time before the actual votes were cast. If,
Right.
and maybe the votes were a bit quick. This meeting was not recorded, if I recall. Is that fair? Is that correct?
I don't know. I can't remember.
Oh, Catherine, you're on mute. Oh,
Sorry, I was pressing my space bar. I guess it wasn't working. What minutes are you referring to?
The meeting of February 27th, Catherine.
7.
It's dated February 27th. I don't want to make a big deal about this. I just think if someone were reading this, it could appear that the Finance Committee didn't give due diligence to these actions. That's all. And I think it could have appeared watching it that, you know, I remember distinctly, Alex, you said at one point, are we ready to make a vote?
Mhm.
Are we ready to make recommendations, I should say? And I think we said, yes, yeah, let's, so it could have,
Right.
but I think I'm sure everyone's been thinking about the favorable or unfavorable positions. That's all.
Yep. No, I agree. I'm just looking for,
I'm happy to change that. I can't find it. I
Yeah,
have-
are you sure? Was this the 226 meeting? I'm not.
so the document is titled 2.26.2020.doc. But the date, it's dated 27th of February. I'm sorry, the meeting is for the 27th, but the document title is 26 if you're
Oh, okay.
looking at the document title, which might show up in your subject.
I am. I'm happy to change that. I don't see it. These minutes were already approved, but I'm happy to make a change.
I feel like we had approved these already.
Oh, really? I don't remember it then.
But-
I might have missed it.
I'm looking for that.
We had no meetings on the 27th, so they should be February 26th. They're titled the 26th. Everything says February 26th, but I'm happy to change that. Jim, I just don't see it. Can you explain again where it is and what word you would like to?
Well, I have a hard copy here, Catherine. It's the paragraph just before the statement of review and potential vote on recommendations. It's the paragraph just above that.
Yeah, right. So it looks like the in bold in that review and potential vote is in bold.
Yeah.
It's just above that. Yeah, I just found it as well.
It's just a sentence above
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so I tend to agree. If we've already approved it, I don't want, because it's in reference to the committee members who were in favor of it, and so it's where it's specific to that side of it, which is 3 of the 5 of us. Maybe is it possible, Catherine, to just remove that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And
Thank
do you? Yeah, thanks. And had we already approved it, or is this one up for? We had. Okay, so it'll be amended.
Oh, I don't remember approving it, but okay.
Do we need to vote to amend it?
Let's just
No.
take it out. It's not substantive.
Agreed. Well, thank you very much, Catherine. I appreciate that. Thanks, Jim, for pointing that out. So for the 4 meetings, again, January 29th, Feb 13 and 18, and March 4th, are there any comments on those that you wish to pass along?
Negative for me.
Okay, great. Well, hearing none, we'll go to a vote then.
there was
Sorry,
one,
there was
I'm
one.
trying
Yeah.
to find the date. Sorry, I have electronic versions all of it. There was one that had, it had me as vice chair as opposed to Mike.
Okay, I'll look for that.
But I'll find it and I'll type it in the chat of what day it was. So we
Okay.
can just move on.
Okay, so pending that adjustment.
Copy and paste. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other discussion? Jim, I can't see you, but I know you're not on mute, so I'll suggest we move to a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Alex Began? Do we have to do like a roll call vote? Looks like everyone's got a hand up. Hey, Jim, I heard you. Aye, so we're approved unanimous. Thank you very much, everybody. And Catherine especially for the notes. Okay. Any other points before we wrap up?
I just have one. I don't want to delay this, but I just want to point something out. I asked Diane Bucco for a sample ballot, and she sent me one. And I just found it interesting. One of our biggest overrides, the sample ballot on the fire truck, has no numbers attached to it at all. So when someone votes on that, they're not even knowing what they're voting on in terms of is it the interest payments that we have to pay in 21? Like 9,000 or 5,000 bucks, but
Yes.
is that?
Yeah.
But on the
Well-
ballot question, there's no numbers associated with that question at all. I just found it, kind of lack of clarity, I guess, particularly if we have the ballot question before a town meeting. There's nothing I think that we can do about it.
Are there numbers on the others?
Ballot question.
Yes, there's numbers on all the others, yeah.
That is strange.
That's how town council, that was questioned by even the Board of Selectmen. And town council said it had to be done like that.
With no number
We're
attached.
all in agreement with,
So it's a little befuddling, but council had the final say, and for whatever reason, that's how it
Okay.
is.
All right.
yeah.
I think it's going to be a question that's going to be asked, though, at some point by town meeting members.
Thanks for getting in front of that, Jim, because I think
Yeah.
you're right. So at least we know we can cite the legal requirement to have it as such, for whatever that may be. It might be helpful to understand why. If someone says, well, why didn't you have to put your 9,000 bucks in interest in it? But
Well, I would think they'd want to authorize the full amount of the truck, right? And then with the vote, they'd want to approve the full amount, wouldn't they? And then it's getting paid off as a debt exclusion for the 10 years.
that's a good point. But yeah, like the authorization is for the full purchase price. You're not just authorize, because you're not going to reauthorize the remainder every year. It's a one-time debt exclusion.
Exactly.
It's just that it's mitigated, current fiscal or next fiscal year impact because of the way the timing.
So
plays
yeah,
out.
so it won't be a big impact in fiscal 21, it'll be the interest, but once we start paying the principal and interest, we'll have a bigger payment in 22 going forward for the next 8 years, 9 years.
For sure. Chris or Anthony, if you could try and just get us a high level on that at some point as to why that was, or at least before we have a any kind of community budget forum. Sounds like
Chris,
it's not urgent.
I think
but
Jackie
people
has
have-
that email on that, Chris. If
Okay.
you can follow up with Jackie.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, that's good. Thanks. Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thanks, Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.